I would like to deal with the concept of drash for one moment. Drash is very hard, that in my experience in 12 years in dealing with Jewish-Christian relations, is one of the pillars of interpretation is very hard for Christians to accept. Because if it's not in the Bible, it does not exist. It's a bunch of doctrines of men. Your rabbis made this up. That is fundamentally what I usually encounter. So what I'm going to do with you today is I'm not going to mention one rabbi.
It's okay.
For the purposes of those who are new to this and the audience who are looking at this, just to get a sense of what do we mean with drash. Drash is usually interpreted as the legends of the Bible. For example, let's say with Abraham. There's a great story of Abraham when he was a young child. In his journey of faith, he comes to the realization that there is an ultimate creator. If you already heard this story, sorry, I violated the 11th commandment, thou shalt not bore you. Abraham, in his revelation moment that there is a God, an ultimate God of the earth, and all this paganism surrounding him means nothing, he wants to go ahead and live this lifestyle, but at home it's kind of challenging because his father is the actual person who is selling these items to the world. So he comes up with a brilliant plan. He enters the shop and breaks all the idols and leaves the biggest one there with an axe in the idol's hand. Father comes in the next morning, shouts and screams, and Abraham comes in. He says, "What's up, Dad?" He says, "Look around. What's going on here?" "Oh, you wouldn't believe what happened. Last night, one idol said he was better than the other. Look what happened. He won." And the father says, "What are you talking about? These idols don't do anything." "So, Dad, why do you sell them?" This is a typical thing of drash. I would like to define drash as the question you should have asked. That's the way I would like to interpret drash. And I'm going to use the story of Asenath. Asenath is the wife of Joseph, the daughter of Potiphera, the chief of On. Okay? I'm going to set this up for you. So if I did the famous Bible quiz that is now on TV, I think it's still on TV, right? And I say, who is Asenath? And you would say, well, the wife of Joseph. Ding, 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 you won. Excellent. Who else is she? Well, she's the daughter of Potiphera. How do you know that? So we go to Genesis chapter 41, verse 45. And let's give the context of what's happening here. Joseph is not liked by his brothers much. They actually want to try to kill him. He is eventually sold into slavery. Whether the brothers did that or not is subject to interpretation. He ends up in the house of Potiphar. He is accused of a rape, does not die. That's a big question mark. How is that possible? Ends up into the dungeon. And because he's so great in understanding people's dreams, he is called to Pharaoh to interpret. And he becomes the most powerful person on earth. And Pharaoh grants him a wife. And that is Asenath. The greatest question I have is, and this is the foundation of what I'm doing with the drash today, is how dare our biblical forefather, Joseph, to go ahead and have kids with a pagan? And that these kids would eventually be incorporated into the tribes of Israel. I cannot believe that Joseph would do such a thing. Now the juices are flowing in the audience right now. They're all saying, how dare he go ahead and do such a thing? The Bible says it, therefore it's there. So I'm going to say, okay, hold on. Everything's fine. So you have a biblical verse that proves that Joseph did it. That's fine. And I want to build up your argument even more. Okay? So I'm going to play both sides of the coin. So I'm going to be your lawyer right now. And if you go for a few verses later on, it repeats the biological lineage of Asenath when she gives birth to Ephraim and Manasseh. It repeats that she is the daughter of Potiphar, the chief of On. So there are two verses that say who she is. And I'm still going to say, I can't believe that Joseph would do that. But you say, well, whoa, there's another place. There's another place that says in chapter 46, verse 20, when Jacob is about to bless his grandchildren, it repeats the biological lineage. 3 verses, that's it. David, you have a problem with your faith. You need to, check yourself into some rehab spiritually. But my fundamental question is, I cannot believe Joseph would have kids with this wife. He might have to accept the wife because of Pharaoh. But to have kids, that's a whole different thing. How can he go and have kids with a pagan? How can he go out the Abrahamic faith? It's not like he was a rebel without a cause. He is a person who is godly. When he speaks in godly terms. Yet, he's doing what I think, right now, is an ungodly thing. But I got my verses to back me up too. Okay, you got 3 verses on your side. I'm going to go 3 verses on my side. So we first need to go to chapter 24, book of Genesis, verse 4. And this is when Abraham is instructing Eliezer to find a wife for Isaac. And there's a specific commandment from Abraham. You cannot have anyone from this land of Canaan to marry my son. You must go to my family. You can't marry outside the family. This is Godfather biblical style. So Abraham sets up the thing that you can't marry outside of the family, period. You might say, well, that's only Abraham who says it carried over. So we need to go to chapter 27, verse 46, to chapter 28, verses 1 through 2. There, Rebekah is looking for a wife for Jacob. And there's a specific instruction from both of them. I don't want you marrying anyone from the land. You must go to my family. So it was not simply a one-time edict. It passed over through the forefathers. This helps me to build up my argument that Joseph would not go against the family. The question we should have asked, how can he do that? He knows what the family tradition is. It's biblical. And I would say to you, if someone would marry outside of the family, what would it be called? And indeed, someone married outside of the family. We go to chapter 26, verses 34 to 35. And in all English translations that I know of, it is not equal to the Hebrew itself. It says that the marriage that Esau did to Judith and Basmath was a thorn in the family sides. That is usually what the translation, or grief-stricken. But the Hebrew doesn't say anything about ko'ev or kotz, nothing like that. It says morat haruach, a spiritual rebellion. You have 3 verses on your side. I have 3 verses on my side. I have 3 verses to tell me that Joseph wouldn't do such a thing. Okay, so far so good. What would be the easiest way to solve this entire equation? Excellent, she converted. Asenath converted to the Abrahamic faith. It solves the biological lineage and solves the problem that Joseph can have kids with this. That would be the easiest way to do it. But then if you do that, I would say, how can you prove it? right? If I'm coming from a Christian mindset, where is it biblically? Is there a verse that says Asenath converted? So I'm going to give you an inference to it. And we have to go back to Genesis chapter 41, verse 50. Before we go into that, there is a common community of interpretation between Judaism and Christianity that states as follows. God's language is precise. There is nothing extra in the words. If a verse is redundant or focusing on a specific concept, it has to be teaching me something I did not know beforehand. Okay, just want to make sure, just letting you know, both Judaism and Christianity share in this community of interpretation. If you go back to this verse, it says that Asenath gave birth to 2 sons, and they were born to him. If I wrote this verse, I would have just said, Joseph and Asenath had 2 kids. Why the emphasis? Born to him, born to his faith. Okay? It's not a clear thing that she converted. It is used as an inference because of the redundancy or the emphasis in the verse concentrating on the male in the relationship. And we're saying that that relationship is the Abrahamic faith of Joseph. So far, so good? Okay. So what I did with you up until now, I didn't mention a Rambam, I didn't mention a Rashi, I didn't mention anyone. I set this up typically that you would normally get in any message in a Sunday school. 3 verses on one side, 3 verses on another side. And we have actually 2 possible answers. A, Joseph did it anyway. That's a possible thing. Or Asenath converted. And here comes the drash. I'm going to tell you a little story. But I'm telling you, I cannot prove it to you biblically. Mark, I got to get you out of the room. She's telling each other. Mark is already excited because he already knows the drash. The drash is that Asenath is the daughter of Dinah. Now, let me tell you the story. It's much better than Days of Our Lives. Dinah, we are introduced that one day she goes out and she gets raped. Right? Shechem, remember that story? What happens to Dinah afterwards? You don't hear about her. It's an amazing thing. There's a rape that takes place, and this woman is never heard of again. Commentators are always perplexed about this. What happened to Dinah? So I'm going to give you a little story. She became pregnant through that rape. She gave birth to the child and named her Asenath. The uncles were not very happy about this child. Back in those days, being raped was a humiliation of the family. So they decided that instead of killing her, they would sell her to slavery. She ends up in Potiphar's house. Remember I told you Joseph never died because of the alleged rape? He should have been killed, but he ends up in the dungeon. The reason why is because Asenath testifies on Joseph's behalf and saves Joseph's life. He ends up in prison. During this time, Potiphar gets a job promotion. He becomes the chief of On. When that happens, he gets a name change. He becomes Potiphera, the chief of On. So when Joseph comes out of prison and gets this lovely woman, he's actually receiving his niece. He's actually marrying within the family. Now, the purpose of the story is not to have a good bedtime story at night. The purpose of the story is to teach you several things. Number one, how God is magnificent. Because Joseph must have been the most loneliest man in the world, even though he's the most powerful person in the world. He is this Hebrew ruling over an Egyptian nation. He is that outsider, and no one likes him. Who is the only person who can really comfort him during this time, who has similar experiences family-wise, situation-wise, is Asenath. God provides the ultimate soulmate for Joseph. That's one. Number two is no matter where you come from in life, no matter what your family situation is about, you can be part of God's divine plan. Asenath, even though she's a daughter of a rape, is the royal family. It's a little different than Great Britain. That you can be part of the divine plan. The question is, are we ready to be part of that divine plan or not? But what I see from this is the message we learned from this drash. And you would say, but I can't prove it to you biblically. All I can say to you that this is a recorded story in Judaism for over 2,000 years. And that this is part of who we are as Jews, that when we're looking at the Bible, we also look at drash eyes, meaning we're trying to answer the question you should have asked from the beginning. And we're doing that in a sense of communal spirit with God and His Word. And this is not simply doctrines of men. These are people who understood the Word and trying to come to understanding the tension between verses sometimes. So when we go back, we're not to the verses that talk about the lineage of Asenath, we're not saying that they're biological, but they're adoptive. We're talking about the adoption of Asenath. Why would it even be repeated 3 times? You already got it once. Why do you have to repeat it so many times? Because this type of lineage was different than any other type of lineage. This was an adoptive thing, and there's a story behind it, and that's the story. So I'm giving you this verse for this concept because to tell you that when Jews look at this, you don't have to accept it. I'm not saying you have to accept it, but it's part of our DNA when we look at the Bible. So far, so good? Okay.